The boy woke up every night at 2 a.m. to a strange knocking sound beneath the floor. He called for his mother, but she didn't believe him, until she hired a floor repairman and discovered the horrifying truth buried underneath. Thud. 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 The knocking came steadily from beneath the thin wooden floorboards, echoing like fingernails scraping against the lid of an old coffin. Lucas opened his eyes. He sat up, back pressed against the wall, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Outside the window, snow hadn't started falling yet, but the thick fog hung low like a shroud over the Vermont sky. The alarm clock on his nightstand gave a soft click. Its red hand pointed exactly to 2 a.m. Third time this week. He clutched his worn teddy bear tightly to his chest and pulled his knees up. The soft scratching sound returned. Thud. Then silence. A moment later, it came again. Same spot, right beneath the floor, right under his bed. Quietly, he slid off the mattress, his small feet meeting the cold wood, without a sound. Not a step, just steady, careful breathing. Lucas sat down, pressing his ear to the floor. Silence, but not true silence. What he heard had a metallic tang to it, something choked, like breath trapped beneath the boards. Faint, but real. At the front of the house, Emma sat curled up near the fireplace. She couldn't sleep tonight. On the table, her laptop was still open to a half-finished job application. An email had just been sent to a medical center in Burlington. No guarantee they'd call, but she had to start over somewhere, anywhere really, as long as it wasn't back there. She reached for her glass of water, then paused when she heard her son's bedroom door creak softly open. She turned her head. Lucas stood in the hallway, hair messy, eyes wide. Not the loud kind of scared, but the quiet fear of a child who knows how to live in the dark. "You heard it again?" Emma asked, setting the glass down gently. Lucas nodded. "Under the floor. There's knocking. Like someone's trapped down there, knocking to get out." Emma stood, picking up a small flashlight and walking toward the hallway. "Probably just rats banging into the pipes again, honey." "It's not rats, Mom," Lucas said firmly. "I heard a man whispering, like someone moaning down there." Emma stopped. A soft wind hissed through the crack in the old window, carrying the scent of damp wood mixed with a hint of mildew. It had been 3 weeks since they moved in. A strangely cheap wooden house, left unoccupied for 2 years. A quiet place in the middle of a small town where neither she nor Lucas knew a single soul. After her husband died in a truck accident on his way home, just 4 minutes from their old front door, Emma decided to leave everything behind. She wanted some place silent, remote. But now, that very silence made her skin crawl. She opened Lucas's bedroom door and swept her flashlight around the bed, across the floor, into each corner of the room. Just warped floorboards and a few rusty nails. "Nothing there," Emma said, keeping her voice calm. Lucas didn't respond. He picked up a piece of paper from his desk and pressed it into her hand. On it was a crude drawing, a person lying face down on the floor, hands clawing upward, eyes wide open and rolled back white. "I didn't draw this," Lucas said. Emma froze. "I mean, my hand did, but my head didn't think of it." The next morning, Emma called Benji Ryder, the only handyman in the area whose number she'd found on a note in the grocery store. "Old wood warps easy," Benji said as he crouched, tapping around Lucas's floor. "But this hollow space underneath, that's a little unusual." "Hollow space?" Emma tilted her head, sitting on a chair. "Right here." He tapped with the handle of his hammer, a dull, muffled sound. About 3 feet square. No plumbing under it, no air vent, just sealed off with mismatched plywood. "Could it be an old access panel?" Emma asked. "Could be. Or something somebody meant to hide. Benji looked up at her. "Want me to open it?" Emma hesitated. "Number... not yet. Let's wait till the weekend." Benji nodded and packed up his tools. Before leaving, he turned back and added, "Something's off about this place. I'm not superstitious, but this house has had trouble before." That afternoon, Mrs. Doris Carter, the neighbor to the right, brought over a loaf of baked bread. Her hair was bright white, her coat covered in little American flag pins, and she spoke in a low, old-fashioned voice. "Been 3 weeks already? Time flies." She glanced at Lucas, then toward his bedroom door. "A family used to live here," Doris said quietly. Then they left. Right in the middle of winter, 2 years ago. No one knows why. No one asked. Emma nodded in thanks for the cake, but didn't invite him inside. That night, Emma lay awake, listening to the ticking of the clock. Lucas was already asleep, but just before drifting off, he whispered, "He's still there, and he's scared, Mum." Emma sighed. She got up, grabbed the flashlight, and walked toward her son's room. She pressed her ear to the floor. At first, she heard nothing. But then, click, click, click. A soft, steady scratching, very clear. Not a mouse, not the pipes. It was like someone was lightly dragging their fingernails across the wood, trying to say something, or maybe just pleading. She jerked back, her hands trembling. The flashlight slipped from her grasp and hit the floor, its beam tumbling along the baseboard. On the floor, the light passed right over a set of marks, 3 fresh, straight, parallel scratches. Emma stood frozen. In that moment, she couldn't tell if what she'd heard was real or just the echo of everything they had already lost. But when she turned toward the door, Lucas was standing there. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "He knows you heard him too," he whispered. And from that moment on, both mother and son understood. Something was there, beneath the wood. Something real enough that sleep, as they once knew it, would never come again. Click, click, click. The sound echoed dry and hollow through the still room. One by one, the screws came loose from the wooden hinge, each clink hitting the old floorboards like every noise carried weight. Benji Ryder had knelt on this exact spot once before, 3 days ago, after Emma had called him over in a rush, unsure whether she actually wanted him to come. Back then, he'd only given the place a quick look, shined his flashlight into the cracks, stood up and shook his head. Might be rats, might not be. Only way to know for sure is to open it up. Emma had hesitated then. She wasn't sure what she feared more, the scratching sounds every night, or the chance that something real might be down there. This time, he came back right on schedule. No coffee, no small talk, just gloves, tools, and silence. He knelt low at the edge of Lucas's bedroom floor, pulling the carpet aside. The dim light from the window spilled across his back, casting a long, unmoving shadow behind him, like someone else was watching from just over his shoulder. "I've never opened something that made my skin crawl like this," he said. Emma stood behind him, arms tightly folded across her chest. In one hand, she held a small flashlight, her finger hovering over the switch, ready, but waiting. Not out of reluctance. Out of a sharp, unshakable feeling that once that light came on, everything would change. Lucas stood in the doorway, clutching a worn grey teddy bear. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, didn't hurry them. He just watched, and the way he watched, it wasn't the look of a child hoping to see something strange. It was the look of someone who already knew what was about to appear. Beneath the floor was a narrow, dark hollow, about 3 feet deep. Old mildewed cloths were stacked like burial shrouds. At the bottom, foam insulation sealed off the last layer, yellowed to a brownish grey, like rotting soil. The air that drifted up was damp and heavy, with a faint metallic tang blended with that unmistakable mouldy scent. The smell of time, shut in too long. Benji shone his light into the space. The beam cut through the hanging dust, revealing cracked wood, mold embedded deep in the grain. He lowered his voice, almost too quiet to hear. "Emma." She crouched down beside him and flipped her flashlight on. A sharper, stronger light swept the hole, then stopped, suddenly. A dent, then a small tear. Not long, but steady, deliberate, like fingernails scraping the same spot hundreds of times until the foam gave way and tore. Then a hand came through, not the kind that bursts out, lunging like in horror movies. It crept out, hesitant, trembling, each knuckle shifting as if even the one reaching out wasn't sure he was still truly alive. Emma stepped back by reflex, a stifled gasp catching in her throat. Her arms swept the air, nearly dropping the flashlight. Lucas jolted, eyes wide, mouth parted, but no sound came out. His stuffed bear slipped from his grip and hit the floor with a soft thud, a sound that somehow rang louder than anything else in the room. Benji froze on his knees, the flashlight quivering in his hand. His eyes were wide, mouth open, but no words came. A whisper, seeping out like moisture from the cracks in the wall, barely rose above silence. "Someone." It wasn't quite a voice, more like the sound of someone who had forgotten how to speak. The hand stayed there, trembling in the beam of light. The bones jutted sharply beneath the skin, pale as wax, the fingertips stained with mottled purple, dried blood, clinging to the nails like old glue. Then, the face appeared. First came the deep-set eyes, then the flat nose, cracked lips, teeth chipped and scattered behind a mouth that barely opened. Emma dropped to the floor, her back hitting the leg of the table. The flashlight bounced off the wall, its beam wobbling, making the room sway like waves. "Oh my God," she stammered. Benji scrambled backward, the light slicing across his forehead, glinting off the sweat-soaked patch beneath his tangled hair. Lucas screamed, a hoarse, chest-deep wail. He pressed himself against the wall, clutching his head as if he could make it all disappear. The man, or more accurately, the shadow of what used to be a man, whispered again, one word at a time, lips trembling as if his whole body strained to let out what he'd been holding in far too long. I heard the boy. I knew. Someone would come." His voice cracked like a tape played too slow, rough, distorted, warped by too many days, without use. Emma fought to stand, her hands shaking violently as she fumbled for her phone. The screen blurred with tears, not from emotion, but from nerves strung so tight they felt ready to snap, like the last string on a violin. 911, she breathed, half speaking, half hearing her own voice echo from somewhere outside herself. We found someone under the floor, a real person, still alive." Benji sat frozen, his lips forming silent words. Lucas curled up against his mother, burying his face in her arm, his small body trembling with each gust of wind sliding through the window panes. None of the three could remember how long it took them to finally step out of that room. But one thing was clear. From the moment that hand reached out from the darkness, nothing could ever go back to the way it was. One of the EMTs knelt down and quickly checked the man's blood pressure and heart rate. The man was barely whispering, his hands twitching, his eyes fluttering open, but unable to focus. His mouth released a string of broken syllables, not quite forming words. He's severely dehydrated. Could be hypoglycemia or complete systemic exhaustion. The other EMT nodded, pulling an IV line from the medical kit. Emma stepped aside, her arms wrapped around Lucas, her eyes still locked on the pale face that was slowly fading on the stretcher. They lifted him onto the gurney, covered him with a thin blanket, and wheeled him quickly down the narrow hallway. The stretcher wheels let out a soft screech as they rolled across the old wooden floor. Benji followed behind in silence, his shoulders hunched. Whether from the cold or from fear, it wasn't clear. Lucas didn't ask anything, but his eyes stayed fixed until the ambulance doors shut with a heavy finality. A man in a dark blue jacket stepped out of a nearby vehicle, his face unreadable. He was tall, with neatly trimmed hair, and carried himself with a quiet steadiness. His gaze swept over the scene with the air of someone not entirely convinced of what he was about to face. Emma walked out onto the porch without saying a word. The officer held his badge up to his chest. "I'm Elliot Brooks. I was assigned to this area earlier this month. We got an emergency report about a man found in a basement." His last words came out soft, as if he was questioning himself. Benji stepped outside and stood off to the side of the steps. He nodded in greeting instead of speaking. Not quite a basement. It was under the floor, sealed off, like someone was trying to hide it. Elliot raised an eyebrow. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "Who found him first?" "I did." Emma's voice was dry. "I called in a flooring contractor because I'd been hearing strange noises. When they pulled the boards up, he was under there, alive, shaking, pale skin. I don't know who he is." Elliot jotted down notes, then walked over to the bedroom doorway, where part of the floor was still open. He shone his flashlight down, crouching to get a closer look at the torn-up foam and planks. When he turned back, his expression had shifted, serious, intent. "I'll contact the investigation unit. Miss Emma, has anyone suspicious been around the house before now? We just moved in 3 weeks ago, bought the place through a realtor. The previous owner, I've never met him." "Do you have his name?" Emma hesitated, then answered, "Caleb Hargrove." Lucas stepped closer, his hand clutching the hem of his mother's shirt. "Officer?" Elliot crouched down to the boy's level, his gaze softening. "You want to tell me something?" Lucas looked toward his room. Then he spoke, slowly. "I heard him. Many nights before." "Heard what?" "Whispers. Knocking sounds. But I think someone else was down there before him." Emma said nothing. But in her mind, the name Caleb Hargrove had just carved itself a little deeper. Lucas was sent to Becky's place early the next morning. Becky was Emma's younger sister. She lived alone in a small apartment on the second floor at the end of Pine Hollow Street. She worked as a librarian at the high school, quiet, practical, and always the kind of person who showed up just when Emma needed a quiet place to breathe. Emma didn't explain much. Becky took one look at her sister's dark circled eyes and tightly pressed lips, then silently pulled Lucas into her arms. The boy didn't ask why. He just nodded and clutched his grey teddy bear. When the door closed behind them, Emma exhaled sharply, like someone had just cut a strap around her chest. At Addison County Hospital, in ICU room 203, the man who'd been pulled up from the cellar now lay motionless on a metal bed draped in white sheets. An IV line ran into his bony arm, his skin mottled with old scars and deep bruises. The heart monitor beeped steadily, one beat at a time. But to Emma, each tone struck like the ticking of a countdown clock towards something still unnamed. He was awake now, his eyes barely open, pupils not yet fully adjusting to the light. That look, blank, yet wary, made it seem like his mind was still down there under the wood, not quite ready to crawl back up into his body. Emma sat nearby, holding a cup of cold coffee, her back resting lightly against the chair. She wasn't sure why she was there. Maybe it was Lucas's eyes. Or maybe it was simply that she couldn't let someone who'd once been forgotten stay lying there alone again. The door opened. Elliot Brooks stepped in, not in uniform, but wearing a dark grey wool coat. He gave Emma a small nod, then walked over to the bed. "Good morning," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'm Elliot Brooks, the officer in charge of yesterday's incident. I need to ask you a few questions. Are you able to speak?" The man blinked. Slowly, he nodded, heavy and labored, like every muscle had to ask permission to move. Elliot opened his notebook and leaned in slightly. "What's your name?" A brief silence. Then his cracked lips moved. "Martin." Hale. Elliot jotted it down. "Mr. Martin Hale. Do you live here in this town?" Martin nodded. His eyes shifted toward the window, where the white curtain stirred gently in the early breeze. Elliot continued, his voice soft. "Do you remember why you were locked under the floor of 147 Maple Drive?" Martin swallowed dryly. His throat felt like it hadn't had water in days. I'm an electrician." He forced the words out, each one scraping his throat like glass. "The man who hired me, his name was Caleb Hargrove." Elliot tightened his grip on the pen. "What did he hire you to do?" "Fix the circuit panel, but I saw the basement. The door was locked. There was a strange smell, scratch marks on the floor." Martin paused for a moment, as if trying to retrieve an image blurred by light and time. "I suspected someone was being kept down there." Emma held her breath. She looked at Martin, a chill running down her spine, just like the first night she heard the knocking beneath the floorboards. Elliot leaned forward, his voice now lower. "What happened after that?" Martin looked up, his eyes quiet, but filled with despair. "I planned to go back that night to sneak in and take a few pictures as proof." "And?" "I didn't make it." His voice dropped. "Someone was waiting. I was hit from behind. When I came to, I was already down there." Elliot paused for a second. "Did you see who it was?" Martin shook his head. A slow, painful shake. "Number. I just remember the sound of the trapdoor and a shadow standing close to me. After that, just cold and silence." Emma turned away. She didn't want to imagine it, but the image had already come alive in her mind. A room with no sound, no light, no sense of time, only life ebbing away, one breath at a time. Elliot set down his pen and studied Martin more closely. "Do you remember the time? How long do you think you were held down there?" Martin looked Elliot straight in the eye. In those clouded pupils was something both painful and certain. 3 years. The word had barely left Martin's mouth when the quiet click of shoes echoed down the hallway. Elliot and Emma turned their heads at the same time. A tall man with snow-white hair walked in, wearing an old brown leather coat with tarnished brass buttons. In his left hand, he held a police cap. His right was tucked in his pocket. He stood steady, without needing a cane, but the way he walked, unhurried, deliberate, felt like a man who already knew exactly what he'd find on the other side of that door. A young nurse accompanied him, holding the door and murmuring quietly, "Sheriff Kessler. He used to be the police chief here." Elliot stood up right away and gave a short nod. "Sheriff." Kessler stopped right at the doorway. His eyes swept over Elliot and landed on the man lying in the bed. Martin saw him, and for a brief moment, the heart monitor spiked. His body went rigid, his eyes opened wide. But it wasn't joy, nor was it surprise. It was fear. Emma caught it instantly. She had seen patients wake up in the middle of the night, startled by hallucinations. But this wasn't one of those looks. This was the look of someone who'd just seen the man who left him in that basement. Not the one who did it, but the one who knew and said nothing. Sheriff Kessler didn't flinch. He just stood there, cap in hand, eyes fixed on Martin. "I heard the news. Someone just came back from the dead." His voice was low, steady, emotionless, like he was talking about someone finding a lost dog in an old yard. Elliot didn't answer, but stepped slightly to the side, placing himself between Martin and Kessler. It wasn't obvious, but anyone paying attention could tell he didn't fully trust the man who came before him. Sheriff Kessler curled his lip. Not a smile, just a slight tilt of the head. "I was the one who signed off on that property transfer back in 2020. The previous owner moved out in a hurry. No legal issues. And no missing persons reports in the file," Elliot replied, his voice a shade sharper. Kessler crossed his arms, eyes narrowing on Martin. "Then I guess no one was looking for him, or no one cared." Martin clamped his lips shut. His neck flushed red, like he was choking on silence itself. A cough burst out, followed by a faint, painful groan. Emma stepped back, tightening her grip on her purse strap. She didn't know exactly what kind of history lay between those two men, but the air in the room had just gotten heavier. Elliot gave a slight nod. "Thank you for stopping by, Sheriff. The patient needs rest now." Kessler didn't react for a few seconds. Then he stepped back, turned, and headed for the door. But just before leaving, he paused. His voice dropped low, almost quiet enough for Elliot alone. "You're new here. Some old things are better left buried. This town has its own way of keeping peace." The door closed behind him. Elliot remained still, his hand tightening around the pen in his coat pocket. Emma glanced at Martin and saw his lips moving, no sound coming out. Finally, he spoke, just loud enough for her to hear. He knew from the beginning. No one could say what still lay hidden in that darkness, much less imagine the sheer horror of a truth kept buried for far too long. Emma opened the door slowly, as if afraid of disturbing a past still hiding beneath the wooden frame. The house was unusually quiet now. No more tiny footsteps of Lucas running circles around the sofa. No more wind whistling through the door cracks at night. Only the creak of long unused hinges and the damp scent of old wood lingered in the air, a smell that suggested the house itself had witnessed more than anyone could imagine. Elliot stood just behind her, hands in the pockets of his coat. Neither of them needed to speak the thought out loud. This wasn't just a routine scene check. This was the moment they had to face what the entire town had long chosen to ignore. "Martin said the basement isn't under the living room," Emma whispered. "It's beneath the hallway behind the kitchen." They followed that lead, moving through the narrow kitchen where the wall paint had begun to crack, stopping in front of an old section of wall, patched and sealed. No door, no hinges. Elliot tapped it lightly. It sounded hollow. Then he knelt down, shining his flashlight. "Fresh layer of cement," Elliot said, "but there's still an air gap along the bottom edge." Emma crouched next to him, running her fingers along the surface until they paused at a spot where fine hairline cracks spread like a spider web. A voice behind them broke the silence. "This is exactly where I had my suspicions 3 years ago." Emma turned sharply. A woman in her 30s stood at the front doorway. Her shoulder-length hair framed a serious face, and she wore a clay-colored trench coat. In one hand, she held a voice recorder and a leather-bound folder. "Grace Milton. I'm a freelance journalist, and I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to set right what I once failed to uncover." Elliot stepped forward, instinctively placing himself slightly in front of Emma. "You investigated this case before." Grace nodded, her eyes darkened, as if remembering something long buried. "Caleb Hargrove used to be someone I was tracking. There were at least 3 missing children cases in the areas where he'd lived. I sent a series of reports to the paper. The result? I got suspended for defaming a citizen with no criminal record. A week later, Caleb moved out of town. She gently placed the file on the worn wooden table. Now I think he never really left. All three knelt in front of the cemented-over wall. Elliot used a crowbar from the garage to pry at the plaster. The sound of crumbling concrete echoed like snapping bones. After about an hour, the wall gave way. A hollow space appeared, low and dark, leading deeper below ground level. Elliot shone a flashlight down. The beam caught a set of rotting wooden stairs descending into what was clearly a real basement. They all stepped down, each footfall landing like the thump of a tightening heartbeat. Inside, the concrete walls were stained with handprints. In one narrow corner, symbols had been scratched in with something sharp. Children's names, dates, and tally marks. 5, 10, 30, 100. As if someone had lived there, counting the days one by one. Emma stood frozen, her eyes landing on a name. A. Lisa, 2016 Matty, 2018 CE. Grace stepped closer, shining her light on a section of old piping where a piece of torn cloth had been tied, like a keepsake. None of these kids were ever listed in the town's missing persons reports. Elliot said, and Caleb might still be here. Upstairs, Elliot's phone buzzed. He answered. Just a few seconds later, his face changed. Emma? He turned to her, his voice no longer steady. Lucas isn't at Becky's anymore. The back door was forced open. Nobody saw a thing. Emma went numb. No scream, just her body recoiling, hitting the cold wall behind her. Grace said, I'll check the neighborhood cameras. He might still be close. Elliot nodded, already dialing the station. Emma stood there, her hand trembling, not from fear, but because fury was already rising in her chest. A rusty grey pickup turned off the dirt road on the west edge of town. The back window, coated in dust, was just clear enough to reveal a small hand pressed against the glass. Faint, weak, no scream, no sound, only wide, staring eyes, and a soft, distant sound from the trunk. Click. The rain started in the afternoon and didn't stop all night. The drops were fine, like mist, falling steadily, laying a damp chill over everything, including people's hearts. Emma stood outside the town police station, her black coat soaked through, hands clenched tightly around the strap of her bag. Beside her, Elliot and Grace had just stepped out after over an hour in the meeting room, a room where there'd been no pounding on the table, no urgent phone calls, and most importantly, no orders to act. The chief of police, Roy Delaney, Sheriff Kessler's successor, had spoken softly. We'll look into it. Maybe the boy just wandered off, or someone picked him up by mistake. Emma had looked him straight in the eye then, eyes that knew more than they let on. They sat at the cafe across from the station. The place was quiet, the dim lights casting a faint glow across the rain-speckled wooden table. Elliot pulled a folder from his coat pocket. I just checked the state system. Caleb Hargrove's records have been completely wiped. Grace raised an eyebrow. That's not possible. Not just his personal file, birth certificate, property taxes, even ID photos. Elliot lowered his voice. Someone high up in law enforcement had to do it. Maybe Kessler, maybe someone above him. Emma bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. They let him exist, like a ghost. Grace left the table first. She had a short meeting with the one person she still trusted, Ali Greer, the town librarian. In the basement archive room of the library, a fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Ali quietly pulled out a file box by hand. Each entry listed the year, address, and head of household. Grace opened the box, her eyes skimming quickly over the index cards. She stopped at one. The house on Maple Drive, year 1997, A little girl named Naomi Ellsworth was reported missing from there, 6 years old. No body ever found, no suspects ever charged. Ali lowered her head. None of us were allowed to talk about that case. Kessler closed the file after 3 months. She paused. Naomi was his biological niece. Grace froze. Emma stood still in the empty room, the dim nightlight casting her shadow long across the floor. The brown envelope in her hand felt like it was burning hot, even though it gave off no heat. Her fingers slipped under the paper's edge, slowly drawing out the photograph inside. In the photo, Lucas, her boy, the same child who just last night had been hugging his grey teddy bear, sketching on the kitchen floor, now appeared with both wrists bound by rough old rope. His collar was rumpled, and the lighting flickered as if from a broken bulb. His eyes were wide, round and wet, like he already knew. His mother would be the first to see this picture. Below the photo, scrawled in blood-red letters, "If you keep talking, your kid will be the next one in the basement." In that moment, Emma's world didn't shatter with a bang. It broke in absolute silence. The apartment sounds vanished. No ticking from the wall clock, no rain pattering against the porch, no wind slipping through the door crack. She couldn't hear a thing, not even her own heartbeat. The paper slid from her hand and fell to the floor like a dagger sinking into her gut. Her knees buckled. One hand hit the wood to catch herself, her breath escaping in a choked gasp, like someone had just squeezed her chest shut. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her whole body just trembled, as if caught in a cold she couldn't name. For a fleeting second, Emma thought, this is when people lose their minds. This is the line. Once crossed, you break, and you never come back the same. But she didn't cross it. She got up. No shouting, no calling out Lucas's name, no throwing things. She simply bent down, picked up the photo, folded it carefully, and slid it into her inside pocket. Each movement deliberate, like a ritual. Not because she was cold, not because she was scared, but because something inside her had just shifted, slowly, deeply, and sharp as steel. She walked to the kitchen table and reached for her phone, searched for the name Elliot Brooks, pressed call. He picked up after the third ring. "Emma?" His voice held a trace of concern, but she cut him off direct. "I just got a photo of Lucas." A short silence on the other end. Then Elliot asked, voice dropping low, "Who sent it?" "No idea. No postmark, no return address. Just a threat, if we keep digging." Elliot held his breath, but Emma didn't give him a chance to speak. Her voice no longer trembled. "I'm not calling the police. I'm not telling the town either. I don't need any of them anymore, Elliot." She pressed each word like driving in nails. "From now on, we do this alone." And for the first time all day, she felt like she was breathing the right way. Not because someone told her to, not because someone allowed it, but because if she didn't breathe, the silence would be the thing to kill her, before Caleb ever could. A figure stood still behind the trees lining Maple Drive, face hidden beneath a raincoat hood. At his feet, the wet earth held the impression of large boots. He didn't move, just kept his eyes on the glow from Emma's living room window. Then he turned and melted into the darkness. The light didn't reach where he stood. No one could have guessed that just when things seemed ready to unravel was exactly when the real nightmare began. The sun had just disappeared behind the old pine trees on the horizon. The house on Maple Drive was swallowed by darkness, the only light a faint beam from a flashlight slicing through the musty, dust-heavy air. Emma had made up her mind to return, not out of hope, but to confront the past. She needed evidence, and she couldn't do it alone. She called Grace Milton, an independent journalist who had once pursued the town's missing persons cases. Grace didn't ask many questions. She simply agreed after one sentence. "I need your help, if we want to expose Caleb." They returned to the house together, bringing flashlights, tools, and a fear too heavy to name. Grace Milton, the journalist, crouched down quietly, her hand resting on a patch of damp, blotchy wall. Tilting her head, she ran her flashlight slowly along a line of cracks. "This mortar's newer than the rest," she said softly, turning to Emma. Emma Carter stood nearby, backpack of tools on her shoulders, wearing thick rubber gloves. She nodded without speaking. Every movement they made was quiet, as if they feared waking something still lurking in the house's dark corners. They started prying at the bricks with a small crowbar. With each layer of cement that crumbled away, a sour, damp stench seeped out. After nearly an hour, a small opening appeared. "There's something inside," Grace whispered. Emma reached in and pulled out a handful of crumpled papers, soaked and black with mold. They laid them out on an old wooden table, gently patting them dry with tissue. The handwriting was shaky, scrawled in pencil, faint and trembling. "My name is Aidan. I'm 10 years old. Somebody, please help me." Another slip of paper, the writing smaller and more uneven. "The electrician. His name was Martin. He came. He held my hand. He said I'd be okay. But then he disappeared. I think he's dead." Grace's voice caught in her throat. "This boy met Martin. They were both trapped, but he didn't survive." Emma stood frozen, her hand clenched tight and pale. She didn't dare imagine where Lucas might be now. Her eyes drifted toward the corner of the room, where the flashlight illuminated words scratched into the wall with a rusty nail. Matty, 2005, 4 tally marks, and a 5th one slashed across. "Day survived," Emma whispered. Elliot arrived shortly after Grace's brief call. He was in plain clothes, a forensic kit slung over his shoulder. "What have you found?" Grace handed him the note. He examined it, then exhaled deeply. "Boy named Aidan. Went missing in 2002. The case was never fully investigated. The sheriff back then was Kessler." Emma looked at Elliot. "You're sure?" "I checked. Caleb Hargrove lived at this address from 1999 to 2015. During that time, at least 3 children went missing without explanation. Every case was closed after a few weeks." Grace suddenly bent down, picking something small from the wall's crevice, a scorched photograph, edges burned. In it, a thin man in dark glasses, Caleb, stood beside a heavy-set middle-aged man, Sheriff Kessler. Behind them, a battered silver pickup truck with a faded license plate, but an unmistakable shape. "That's the truck that took Lucas," Elliot said, his voice hardening. Emma stared at the photo, feeling like her heart was being squeezed in a vice. "We were wrong to trust the system," she said slowly. Grace nodded. "We need to find Matty. That name doesn't show up in any residential records, but I've come across it before, in an old article that was later pulled from the online archive. A boy named Matty, said to be temporarily living with a relative on Maple Drive in 2005. No one saw him after that summer. No school enrollment. No missing persons report." She looked up at Emma and Elliot. "Caleb carved that name into the wall. That means the boy was here, and he never left in any normal way." Elliot pulled out a map and pointed to a wooded area east of town. "That photo was taken here, the old quarry. It's been abandoned since 2004. Trucks used to go in and out constantly. If Caleb's still operating, that's the only place remote enough." Emma took Aidan's note back in her hands. She smoothed it flat, folded it with care, and tucked it into her chest pocket. "We're out of time." She was no longer a frantic mother. The look in her eyes now belonged to someone who had seen the dark and chosen to step into it without looking back. The old-growth forest east of Addison seemed untouched by artificial light. Beneath the damp canopy, an aging pickup truck rolled forward slowly, its headlights barely illuminating a few yards ahead. Elliot was behind the wheel. Emma sat in the passenger seat. In the back, Grace hunched over an old map they'd copied from the 1996 land use files. "About 200 meters more, and we'll reach the old hunting camp," Grace said, her voice dropping. "Caleb rented it back in 2004 under a fake company name. It's been abandoned since, but what's strange is the ownership has been kept up, regularly, through an anonymous trust. His name no longer appears in the land records, but the legal trail still gives him access." Emma tightened the strap of her backpack. Inside were a flashlight, a flare gun, and Lucas's handkerchief, the one she'd found in the storm shelter in her basement. When the truck came to a stop, no one reached for the door right away. A cold wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of rot and damp earth, the smell of a place untouched by time. The cabin emerged faintly through the underbrush, slanted roof, splintered wood siding, but the iron padlock on the door looked new. "He's been back recently," Elliot murmured. "This lock was just replaced." Emma wedged the crowbar in gently. The door gave way with a creak. Inside, the cabin was pitch dark, but not cold. The air held a faint warmth, as if someone had just been there. They stepped in. The smell of sweat and mildew hit them. On the table sat a glass of water, still half full. A piece of stale bread rested on a dented tin plate. Grace moved to the corner of the room and pointed to a section of rug pulled slightly out of place. "There's a trap door." Elliot tugged the rug aside. A metal handle glinted, part of an old iron hatch, rusted but intact. They opened it. A narrow wooden staircase led down into thick darkness. No power, just shadows, heavy and unmoving. Emma went first. Below was a small room, low-ceilinged, walls padded with old carpet and foam for soundproofing. In the middle lay a length of iron chain, one end crudely severed. On the floor, she spotted a scrap of Lucas's handkerchief. The smell still lingered. He was here. Not long ago. Emma's voice cracked. She dropped to her knees, picked up the cloth, and pressed it against her chest. Her eyes swept the room, fresh wear on the chain. Tiny footprints disturbed the dust across the rug. No lab test, no camera feed was needed. A mother's heart told her what no one else could confirm. Lucas had been held here, and Caleb was still playing his game of cat and mouse. Click. A faint sound came from outside the cabin. Elliot immediately looked up. "Someone's out there." He stepped forward and drew his handgun. But the moment he opened the cabin door, a figure lunged at him. A gunshot rang out sharply through the woods. Elliot collapsed, clutching his stomach in pain. Grace screamed. Emma pulled her back inside. The tall, masked intruder froze at the doorway for a moment, then took off into the forest. A tattoo was visible on his arm. 714. Emma pressed Elliot's jacket against the wound without hesitation. Grace grabbed the emergency radio and called for help. That number, it was in Aiden's journal. The torn-out page said 714 was the last day, Grace said, her hands still trembling. Elliot whispered through gritted teeth, "He won't get far." "He knows we're coming." Emma gripped his hand tightly. Her eyes had no more tears, only fire. The sound of a rescue helicopter echoed in the distance not long after. Thanks to the signal from Grace's emergency radio, medics and a small tactical team had been dispatched from the nearby town. While a nurse administered first aid to Elliot on the spot, Emma stood silently by. Her face had gone pale, but she never blinked. She tracked every motion, every steady beep from the monitor, as if willing Elliot to hang on. Elliot was lifted onto a stretcher, breathing through an oxygen mask, his face ghost white. But before they loaded him into the chopper, he managed to grab Emma's hand. In a faint voice, he said, "You have to find the boy. Don't let this happen again." Emma nodded, her throat tight with emotion, unable to speak. Snow had been falling heavily since dawn, covering the rooftops of Addison in a pale, bone-cold blanket. Roads were cut off, cell signals flickered in and out, and the local radio sputtered as if someone was tampering with it from afar. Emma stared out the window of Pastor Carl's house, where Elliot was being kept safe after the shooting. She knew now. This town was no longer safe, and no one could be trusted, except the few standing with her, searching for the truth. Elliot lay still on a plain, wooden bed. The nurse had dressed the wound, and though it had stabilized, he still needed time. Pastor Carl, a man in his 60s with a face weathered by years and eyes that held more than they said, was the only one who'd dared to take them in. He had once been the town's spiritual guide, but after Caleb vanished, he quietly stepped away, saying only that conscience wouldn't let me stay blind. "We're running out of time," Grace said, her hand resting on a map spread across the table. "Kessler's hiding something, and I believe he's the key to finding Caleb." Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on the red dot on the map. The second logging camp, once used for timber, but according to Martin, that's where the children had been taken. Before they disappeared for good. Just then, Allie Greer, the town librarian, called. Her voice was shaky, urgent. "I found a tape from the library's internal security system. Last month, Sheriff Kessler came in around midnight, and someone was with him. I think it was Caleb. I made a backup, but you need to get here fast. I'm scared. Someone knows I have it." Emma and Grace set out at once, driving through snow-choked streets. The library was closed, but Allie let them in through the back, pulling the curtains tight like she was hiding something sinful. She opened her laptop, her hand trembling as she pointed at the screen. "Here, the 11th, last month. Kessler walks in, and 13 minutes later this person shows up. You can't see his face, but the walk, the way he moves his shoulders. It's Caleb." Emma felt her chest tighten. If Caleb was really alive, and Sheriff Kessler had known all along, then they weren't just facing a cover-up. They were up against a conspiracy that had lived in the shadows for 20 years. Grace turned to Emma. "We have to force him to show his hand." They talked for nearly an hour, planning it out. They'd use a fake witness, make an anonymous call claiming someone had seen Lucas at the second camp. Every minute, every step was calculated. Emma knew, if they made a mistake, it wouldn't just be Lucas. She and everyone involved could vanish without a trace. That night, they watched from a distance through binoculars. At exactly 1:43 a.m., an old police cruiser quietly turned onto the snow-covered road leading to the camp. No siren, no lights. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a knit cap, but the familiar face couldn't be hidden. Sheriff Kessler. Grace hit record. The infrared camera captured every movement with perfect clarity. Kessler walked around, checked the cabin doors, then pulled out a key. He took the bait. "We've got him," Grace whispered. Emma kept her eyes on the binoculars, her heart pounding with fear and fury. The truth wasn't coming out in a report or someone's story. It was unfolding live, in the shape of a powerful man, quietly helping a monster. When Kessler left, they followed from a distance, documenting the entire route. He didn't return to the station. Instead, he turned down a back road behind the cemetery, one only locals would know about, that led to an old wooden shed. once used to store hunting gear. Emma looked at Grace. "We can't wait any longer. Tomorrow I'm bringing that video to Carl. If the press won't speak up, he will. From the pulpit, where the whole town has to listen." Grace nodded, then looked down at the map. Her finger pointed to a strange marking, faint but highlighted in smudged red ink. "Hold on. This isn't on the official zoning map. But Martin once mentioned an old tunnel. Ran from behind the cemetery all the way to the base of Claymore Mountain. It might have been an escape route or a passage Caleb used to move people." Emma followed her gaze, a tight knot forming in her chest. If he's still running things, that's where Lucas is. Or at least, what's left of him. They looked at each other. Neither said a word. The wind howled through the cracks in the door like a distant warning. But to them, it was something else. Entirely. It was the sign that the hunt had already begun. The sky was blanketed in thick fog as Emma made her way toward the abandoned lumber mill at the base of Claymore Mountain, the spot Grace's map had marked as the end of the old tunnel. She hadn't slept at all the night before. The image of Elliot, lying motionless and wounded, and the hollow look on Lucas's face kept flashing in her mind, slicing through her heart with every recollection. The guilt, the torment of knowing that her own decision had led to others getting hurt, wouldn't let her rest. She knew that if she didn't act now, the regret would haunt her for the rest of her life. She hadn't told anyone, not the police, not a soul. There was no time left for waiting or asking permission. If Lucas was still alive, he was here, and only she could bring him back. The lumber mill's door creaked as Emma pushed it gently open. The wind whistled through the gaps in the rotting planks, like the breath of the past stirring awake. Inside, the floor was blanketed in dust, but a trail of fresh footprints was clearly visible. She pulled out her flashlight and aimed the beam into the shadow beneath the stairs, where a floor hatch was hidden under a thin rug. As she peeled it back, a cloud of dust rose into the air. Beneath the boards was a passage leading down, dark, damp, and thick with the smell of decaying earth. Emma lowered herself carefully onto the narrow wooden steps, one hand gripping the cold, damp wall. Every step matched the pounding of her heart. Every breath was a silent plea. At the end of the path, her flashlight lit up an old metal door. The lock had been replaced recently, but someone had been careless. The hinges showed signs of having been pried open. Emma pulled a hairpin from her jacket pocket and slid it into the keyhole. A few seconds later, a faint click broke the silence. Inside was a small concrete room. No windows, no light. The walls were covered in rough charcoal drawings with a few desperate words scratched beside them. In the corner, a small body lay barely moving. Lucas. Lucas! The boy looked up, eyes wide. He couldn't leap to his feet, his hands were tied, but the light in his eyes was enough to make Emma rush over and pull him into her arms. In that instant, everything else vanished. There was only breath, the pounding of her heart, and the cold skin of her son. But before she could cut the ropes, a sharp metallic sound rang out behind her. Emma turned. Caleb. He stood there, the flashlight casting a hard light across a face that had changed. Thinner, harder, sharp as stone. His eyes held no anger, just a chilling calm. "You got here faster than I thought. I figured you'd send the police, or maybe a reporter. Move, Caleb." "I didn't hurt him. I just kept him, like the others. The ones no one looked for, no one cared about. I just played with them, in a fair way." Emma stepped in front of Lucas, hands shaking with rage. "They're children, not your toys." Caleb gave a faint smile. You're not like the others, the ones who cry a bit and then give up. But you came. Alone, to see the world I've lived in all these years. Suddenly, Lucas lunged, slamming hard into Caleb's side, knocking him off balance. In that brief moment, after Caleb had stepped in, but before his mother could cut the ropes, Lucas had noticed the small folding knife sticking out of Emma's back pocket. Probably the one she always carried for protection. With trembling hands and breathless effort, he had silently worked the blade in the dark, slowly sawing at the rope. Every movement careful, quiet. And the moment he saw his mother threatened, he didn't hesitate. Emma grabbed his hand and pulled him, running toward the hallway. They bolted through the dark corridors, breaths quick and ragged, heartbeats pounding in unison until a harsh white light shone from ahead. "Emma, Lucas, get down!" Grace's voice rang out, followed by Elliot, his face pale, his hand gripping a gun. Caleb gave chase, but as he stepped out of the bunker, a beam of light hit him straight in the eyes, and a voice thundered through the woods. "Freeze! Hands in the air!" Caleb spun around, ready to run back, but Elliot and 2 support agents were already blocking the rear exit. He resisted, flailed wildly, but within seconds they had him pinned down in the snow. Emma emerged from the bunker, holding Lucas tightly, her whole body trembling. Elliot looked at them, his eyes burning with anger. "Do you have any idea how reckless that was? What if he'd killed you? What about Lucas?" Grace rushed over, her voice tight. "Emma, my God, when I woke up and you were gone, I thought you could have been killed. Why didn't you wait for us?" Emma said nothing. She just held Lucas tighter and whispered, "I couldn't wait another minute." Caleb was handcuffed, his head bowed low. The calm demeanor he wore before was gone. He didn't say a word. The last bunker had finally been found. But as Elliot and the support team searched the back rooms, they uncovered 3 small steel doors, hidden behind rotting wooden panels. Behind those doors were 3 children, thin, shivering, and barely responsive to the light. Grace quickly began recording everything. Elliot called for more ambulances and backup. One of the children whispered his name, Aiden, the same name they had seen written on the scraps of paper Grace and Emma had once found. The evidence was undeniable now. As Caleb was led away, he looked back at Emma, eyes dry and unreadable. But as he passed Grace, she whispered, "You've got nowhere left to run. Even God's turned his back." And right then, one of the officers turned to Elliot and said, "We ran a check on the property records. This bunker was renovated a few years ago. The last signature on the permit was Sheriff Kessler's." The bunker had finally collapsed, but for the first time, light was beginning to flood the place that had been buried in darkness the longest. Emma clutched Lucas to her chest, while Elliot sank to the base of a tree. Grace stood still, gripping her camera, tears silently spilling down her cheeks. The hill where the old house once stood was now just a flat patch of earth, a few bare tree stumps, and the yellow investigation tape had been taken down. A gentle spring breeze drifted through, carrying dust and the scent of new grass. A small group had gathered around the land. No sirens, no flashing lights anymore. Only those who carried memories remained. Emma stood quietly among them. Her hand was wrapped around Lucas's, who was now wearing a white button-down shirt, collar fastened. The boy's eyes were fixed on a corner of the lot, where a small stone marker had been placed, engraved with a single name, Aiden. Beside her stood Martin Hale, still thin, but looking stronger than before. He was the first to speak. His voice trembled but stayed steady as he told the full truth to the press and to those gathered. He did not shy away from saying Caleb's name, and he left out no detail about what Sheriff Kessler had done to cover it all up. I once thought I'd never climb out of that hole. But today, I'm standing here not just to speak, but to say this: Those children are no longer whispers in the night. They have names, they have stories, and they deserve to be remembered. Federal agents had stepped in. After the raid at the lumber mill, the files of missing children from over 2 decades were reopened. Sheriff Kessler's name appeared on the indictment. At the hearing, he bowed his head in silence, offering no defense. The town, so used to keeping quiet, was now learning how to face the sound of the truth. Grace returned to the city, but not before leaving Emma a copy of the film she had recorded. "Not to accuse," she said, "but to remember that we did not stay silent." Elliot was still recovering from his injuries, but he came to the memorial, his shoulder bandaged, his steps uneven. When Lucas ran to hug him, the 3 of them, Lucas, Emma, and Elliot, stood together beneath the trees, the sunlight gently filtering through the leaves. Emma looked down at Lucas. For the first time since she moved here, she smiled, not out of comfort, but for real. No more fear cracking through the floorboards, no more nightmares waiting in the dark. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stone. He knelt beside the grave marker and gently placed the stone just beneath the name Aiden. Then he whispered, "Now, he's not buried under the floor anymore." Silence followed, not from grief, but from something only those who have walked through darkness can truly understand. Relief. A beginning. The story came to a close, not with screams, but with stillness, not with harsh justice, but with a soft light, slipping through the final crack in memory to begin the work of healing. And in that moment, the small town in the northeast, after all those years, was truly quiet again. Some stories aren't just meant to be told, but to remind us. The worst thing isn't the darkness. It's the silence that lingers when someone is crying out for help. Through Emma and Lucas's journey, we saw not only the strength of a mother, but the quiet courage of those who choose to face the truth, no matter how painful it is. What about you? If one day you found yourself in that place, would you stay silent, or would you speak?